The city streets buzzed with the hum of cars and the glow of streetlights as dusk settled, casting long shadows that added an air of mystery to the night. Amidst this, a scene of tension and dread unfolded. A dozen white police officers had formed a tight blockade around a single white sedan, weapons glinting ominously in the dim light. They had eyes only for the driver, a white woman, who sat alone, hands gripping the steering wheel, her face a mix of fear and defiance. Her heart pounded as she kept her gaze straight, refusing to let them see her vulnerability. She had been through a long day, but nothing could prepare her for this ambush. From a distance, hidden in the shadows, another woman watched. She was tall, poised, her dark skin gleaming under the flickering streetlights. Dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, her presence was magnetic, and her gaze penetrating. This wasn't just an ordinary woman in the crowd, she was the city's mayor. Though tonight she stood as an unseen guardian, observing the situation with an intensity that crackled in the air. She knew exactly what was happening. She had seen too many incidents like this. Instances where power became a weapon instead of a shield. As the officers barked orders, one of them slapped his hand on the hood, his voice loud and unyielding. "Step out of the car," he shouted, his tone aggressive, as if he had already decided this woman was guilty. The woman's knuckles turned white as she held the wheel tighter, her mind racing for a way out, for someone who might intervene. The mayor's eyes narrowed, watching the scene unfold, and a slow burn of anger spread through her. She had worked tirelessly for the city, for the people she served, and she would not let her city be a stage for such abuse of power. Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward, cutting through the crowd like a storm. Her heels echoed against the pavement as she approached the circle of officers, her face set with a fierce determination. As she closed in, some of the officers noticed her and shifted uncomfortably, their surprise evident. They hadn't expected anyone, least of all the mayor herself, to witness their power play. But it was too late now. She was here, and she would not turn away. "Officers," she called, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the street. "Step back and stand down." The officers froze, glancing around in shock. Some looked at her, their faces pale and uncertain, while others seemed defiant, unwilling to relinquish control. They did not know it yet, but their actions had already condemned them. The mayor's presence was unshakable, her authority undeniable. She was here to put an end to this, and she would not leave until justice was served. The city hummed with its usual night energy, neon lights casting colored halos in the misty air, laughter and conversation echoing faintly from the nearby bars and restaurants. But on this particular street corner, all sounds faded into an uneasy silence as a tense standoff began to take shape. A line of white police officers, their faces unreadable and hard, surrounded a lone white sedan, their collective presence forming an immovable blockade. Inside the car, a woman gripped the steering wheel, her gaze steady but shadowed with fear. She knew better than to make a move or utter a word. One wrong gesture, and she could be perceived as a threat. Her breath quickened, the confined space amplifying the drumming of her heartbeat, each pulse a reminder of how vulnerable she was in this moment. The officers, tall and broad-shouldered, made their demands clear, their voices sharp and unyielding. "Step out of the car," one barked, his tone laced with impatience and authority. A heavy hand slammed against the car's hood, a display meant to intimidate and instill compliance. The woman remained still, her thoughts spinning, trying to recall every self-protection strategy she had learned, willing herself to remain calm. Unseen by the officers, another woman watched from the edge of the scene, her presence concealed by shadows cast by a flickering streetlight. She was tall, graceful, and powerful in a way that drew eyes. Her dark skin and sleek attire contrasted with the officers' light uniforms and rigid postures. She stood still, observing the scene with a fire simmering in her gaze, a fire born of anger and an unshakable determination to uphold justice. This was no ordinary woman. She was the city's mayor, a symbol of strength and resilience to the community. Tonight, she had shed her official titles, stepping into the streets as both a protector and a witness to the ugly truth she had fought hard to eradicate from her city. She knew what these officers thought they could get away with. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this behavior. Though tonight, she would make sure it would be the last. The officers continued, voices cutting through the night, their demands escalating in volume. "Last chance," one officer shouted, his hand reaching toward his holstered weapon. A slight shift in his stance hinted at a readiness to act if he didn't get compliance soon. The woman in the car clenched her jaw, her hands tightening around the wheel as she mentally prepared for the worst. The mayor watched this unfold, her fists clenched, heart pounding with a steady, determined rhythm. She had never shied away from confrontation or from standing up for what was right, no matter how dangerous the situation. And now, she could feel her sense of responsibility surge with renewed purpose. Taking a deep breath, she strode forward, her heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythmic certainty that cut through the charged air. Her steps were calm, measured, but each one was filled with a power that radiated from her core. As she emerged from the shadows, the officers turned to see her, their initial surprise quickly turning to unease as they recognized her face. "Officers," she called, her voice as sharp and clear as a blade. "Stand down." The command echoed. And for a moment, time seemed to stop. The officers shifted, glancing between each other, the weight of the moment settling heavily over them. Some lowered their hands, while others remained on edge, torn between their instinct to exert control and the realization that the woman before them held authority far greater than theirs. The mayor's gaze was unflinching as she locked eyes with the officer closest to her. A tall, burly man with a cold expression and a hand still lingering near his holster. His jaw tightened, reluctant to relinquish the power he held over the woman in the car. But the mayor's presence demanded respect, and he knew better than to challenge her authority directly. "Madam Mayor," he began, his voice dripping with forced politeness, "this is an official police matter. I suggest you let us handle it." Her eyes narrowed, her voice unwavering as she responded, "And I suggest you remember who you're speaking to. Officer." Her tone was steady, carrying the quiet yet unmistakable weight of her position. She took another step forward, placing herself between the officers and the car, her posture defiant and unyielding. "This city is built on justice, and I will not allow you to turn it into a playground for abuse." Another officer stepped forward, his face flushed with anger, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged in such a way. "With all due respect, Madam Mayor," he said, though his tone conveyed anything but respect, "we have protocol to follow. This suspect—" The mayor cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "This suspect," she said, her voice cool and fierce, "is a citizen of this city, entitled to the same protections as anyone else. And unless you have evidence to justify this treatment, I demand you release her immediately." She looked around, taking in each officer's face, reading their hesitation, their discomfort, and, in some cases, their barely contained resentment. But she wasn't deterred. She had spent years fighting for this city, pouring her heart and soul into making it a place where people could live without fear. Tonight, she wasn't just a politician, She was a symbol. A reminder of the city's values. And she would not back down. The officer's hand finally left his holster. Though his expression remained defiant. He took a step back, gesturing for his colleagues to do the same. Reluctantly, they obeyed, each one lowering their stance. The tension gradually dissipating. The woman in the car exhaled a shaky breath. Her relief palpable as she looked up at the mayor. Her silent gratitude evident. She hadn't known what would happen tonight. But now she realized she wasn't alone. She had an ally. Someone who would stand by her even when others sought to tear her down. The mayor turned her gaze back to the officers. Her expression unyielding. "This is not how we serve this city," she said. Her voice resonating with authority. "Each one of you will be held accountable. I'll be expecting a full report on this incident. And I'll make sure your actions tonight do not go unnoticed." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The reality of their situation settling heavily on their shoulders. They had crossed a line. And now there would be consequences. The mayor had seen to that. As the last of the officers lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes, the mayor finally softened her stance. Turning back to the woman in the car, she offered her hand, helping the woman out. Her presence a shield against any lingering threats. They exchanged a look. One of mutual respect and understanding. A silent acknowledgement of the injustice they had both witnessed and the determination to fight it. The mayor's voice, though softer now, carried a weight that lingered in the air. "This city will not tolerate corruption," she said. More to herself than to anyone else. But her words felt like a promise, a vow to uphold the values she had sworn to protect. No matter how dark the night or how fierce the opposition. In that moment, the woman knew that change was coming. That justice would find its way. And as the two walked away, leaving the officers to reckon with their actions, the city's pulse beat a little stronger. A little brighter. Knowing that someone was watching. Someone who cared. The night was thick with tension as the city's usual hum turned to whispers and sidelong glances. Onlookers gathered cautiously at a distance, watching as a line of police officers barricaded a single car. It was an unusual sight, a dozen officers surrounding a single white sedan. Their expressions hard. And postures tense. As though preparing for a confrontation far greater than the lone woman inside seemed capable of. Inside the car, the woman sat still. Her body coiled with quiet resilience. Her hands clenched tightly around the steering wheel. Knuckles white as she tried to steady her breathing. She had faced difficult moments before. But nothing compared to this, the dread in her stomach twisting tighter with each passing second. Her instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. She glanced through her rearview mirror and spotted their silhouettes. Officers standing shoulder to shoulder. Each armed. Each ready. "Step out of the car," a voice commanded. Sharp as a blade cutting through the silence. One officer, broad and towering, stepped forward. His hand hovering over his weapon. His gaze filled with suspicion and contempt. The woman looked up, meeting his eyes through the windshield. Sensing the disdain beneath his hardened expression. She took a breath, steadying herself, refusing to look away. She was alone here. But she would not let them see her fear. Just then, from the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. Her form half illuminated by the glow of a nearby streetlight. She was tall and imposing. Her presence one that naturally commanded attention. The sharp lines of her tailored suit. The assured stride. The poised yet powerful aura, all made it clear that this woman was someone of authority. But beyond her appearance, there was something else. An intensity in her eyes that signaled not only determination but a deeply personal conviction. This woman wasn't just an onlooker. She was the city's mayor. And tonight, She was here to ensure that justice was upheld. The mayor took in the scene, her gaze scanning over the officers, noting each one's stance and expression. The arrogance that came from feeling untouchable. She knew it well, she had seen it before in the eyes of those who thought their uniforms made them invincible. Who used their positions to manipulate, intimidate, and control. Without a word, she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement with steady purpose, breaking the silence that had settled over the scene. As she moved closer, the officers turned, their surprise evident. They hadn't anticipated her arrival. Nor did they expect that the highest official in the city would be standing before them. Her expression a mixture of controlled fury and unwavering resolve. "Officers," she called out, her voice as calm and unyielding as iron. "Stand down." A ripple of confusion passed through the group. The officer who had spoken earlier looked at her, his face a blend of indignation and unease. He was clearly not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by the mayor herself. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed to consider ignoring her command. "Madam Mayor," he finally replied, his tone laced with forced politeness. "We're handling a situation here. Please allow us to do our job." The mayor's gaze didn't waver. She stepped closer, her eyes holding his in a battle of wills. "And I'm here to make sure you do it by the law," she responded, her voice calm yet laced with an authority that left no room for argument. "Now, explain to me why this woman is surrounded by half a dozen armed officers. What threat does she pose?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his colleagues, searching for an answer that might satisfy her. But there was none. He knew it. And she knew it. And that knowledge hung in the air like a weight pressing down on them all. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. She failed to comply with our instructions," he stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. The mayor took a step closer, closing the distance between them, her gaze unwavering. "And what instructions were those?" she asked, her tone cutting through his defenses. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're treating her as a criminal without cause." Silence. The officer shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. He could feel the weight of the crowd's gaze on him. On all of them. The mayor's words had pulled back the curtain, exposing their actions to the light. And there was no hiding from it now. Turning her attention to the rest of the officers, the mayor addressed them directly, her voice rising, each word deliberate, resonating with the authority she wielded. "This is not how we operate in this city. We serve to protect, not intimidate, not terrorize." She paused, letting the words sink in, her gaze sweeping over them. "If you cannot uphold the values of this city, then you have no place wearing that badge." Some of the officers shifted, their faces a mix of shame and resentment. But they lowered their stances, their postures relaxing slightly. A few even took a step back, acknowledging the weight of her words. But one officer, his pride wounded, squared his shoulders defiantly. "With all due respect, Madam Mayor," he began, his voice a thin veil over his frustration. "You may be the mayor, but out here, we're in charge. We know how to handle our jobs." The mayor turned her full attention to him, her eyes narrowing. Her voice, though quiet, held a power that silenced him instantly. "If this is how you think you handle your job, then you are gravely mistaken about what it means to serve the people of this city," she replied, her words cold as steel. "Your badge is a symbol of trust. It's not a weapon to be wielded against those who have done nothing wrong." She let the silence stretch, her words hanging heavily in the air. The officer swallowed, his defiance faltering. the weight of her gaze breaking down his resistance. He shifted, glancing away, his posture shrinking under her scrutiny. With a final, sweeping look at the assembled officers, the mayor spoke, her voice softer but no less resolute. "Step back. And let her go." The officers hesitated. But one by one, they began to obey, lowering their hands, stepping away from the car. The blockade dissolved, and the woman inside released a shaky breath, her eyes lifting to meet the mayor's. A glimmer of gratitude and relief crossed her face, and she nodded, silently thanking the mayor for stepping in when no one else would. The mayor offered her a small, reassuring nod in return before turning back to the officers. "I'll be expecting a full report on this incident," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And rest assured, there will be accountability." As the officers dispersed, their faces clouded with uncertainty, the mayor stayed behind, watching until every last one had left. She turned to the woman, her expression softening. "You're safe now," she said gently, offering a hand to help her out of the car. The woman took her hand, stepping out onto the pavement, her relief palpable. They exchanged a look, one of shared understanding, of knowing that, on these streets, safety and justice often required someone willing to fight for it. The mayor took a breath, her shoulders straightening as she looked around, feeling the weight of the city she had sworn to protect settle over her once again. This moment was just a small victory, one of many she would continue to fight for. Because as long as she was mayor, she would never stop standing between the people and those who would misuse their power. And as the night deepened around them, the mayor walked away, her steps echoing with a promise: in her city, justice would always find a way. The crowd dispersed slowly, but whispers lingered in the air, drifting away with the hum of the city night. The mayor, still standing tall, watched as the last officer turned his back, glancing nervously over his shoulder before disappearing around the corner. She took a slow, steadying breath, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. This night had ended in her favor, but she knew her battle was far from over. Tonight had only pulled back a small corner of a much larger curtain hiding deeper issues. The woman she had helped, still visibly shaken, stepped closer, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and something deeper, an unspoken understanding of what had just transpired. She reached out, taking the mayor's hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think anyone would step in. I thought I was alone." The mayor squeezed her hand, offering a small nod. "You're not alone," she replied gently. "And as long as I'm in office, I won't allow anyone in this city to be treated like that. But tonight was just the beginning. This corruption runs deeper than you know." The woman nodded, her gratitude evident. But before they could continue, the silence was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young officer, his expression conflicted, his gaze darting nervously between the mayor and the woman. His uniform looked freshly pressed, and his face held an innocence, a contrast to the hardened stares of the officers who had surrounded the car earlier. "Madam Mayor," he said, his voice low, almost as if he feared being overheard. I didn't agree with what happened tonight. I tried to speak up, but," his voice faltered, and he looked down, ashamed. "I've seen things that I know are wrong. But if I speak up, I'm afraid of what they'll do to me. I don't know who to trust anymore." The mayor studied him, her gaze penetrating. She saw in him a glimmer of hope, Someone who was torn between loyalty to his fellow officers and the undeniable truth that they were abusing their power. Here was a chance to uncover the heart of the corruption she had long suspected. But she needed to proceed carefully. One wrong move, and he might retreat back into the silence of complicity. "What's your name, officer?" she asked. Her voice kind yet purposeful. He hesitated, glancing around nervously before answering. "Jackson. Officer Tyler Jackson." "Officer Jackson," the mayor said, her voice steady. "You don't have to be afraid. If you're willing to speak the truth, I'll make sure you're protected. But I need to know exactly what you've seen. There are people who rely on this city's police force for their safety, and they deserve to know that they can trust you." Jackson looked at her, his expression a mix of fear and relief. There's a group within the force," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "A few officers. Powerful ones. Who think they can do whatever they want. They say it's in the name of keeping the city safe. But," he shook his head, the shame and anger evident in his eyes, "they use fear. They intimidate people. Sometimes arrest them for no reason. Just because they can. Tonight wasn't the first time I saw it. It's getting worse." The mayor's face tightened, her suspicions finally confirmed. She had heard rumors, whispers of corruption within her own police force. But she hadn't realized just how deeply it ran. She had hoped she could trust the system, that her city's protectors wouldn't turn into its tormentors. But tonight, that hope had been shattered. "Do you have proof?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. "Anything that I can use to bring this to light?" Jackson glanced around, his unease palpable. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. "I've been collecting recordings. Photos. Anything I could without being noticed. It's not a lot. But it's something. Enough to show that this isn't just a few bad apples. It's an organized effort." The mayor's hand closed around the flash drive, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and resolve. This was her chance to make a difference, to root out the corruption that had poisoned her city. But she knew this information made her a target now. 2. She would have to move quickly and carefully to ensure justice was served. "Thank you, Officer Jackson," she said, her voice filled with determination. "This is exactly what I needed. Stay low. And keep your head down. I'll take it from here." Jackson nodded, relief washing over his face, and disappeared into the night. The woman beside her let out a shaky breath, watching him go. She turned to the mayor, her face filled with concern. "Are you sure you'll be safe?" she asked. "These people, they sound dangerous." The mayor nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. "I knew the risks when I took this job. But I won't back down. Not now. Not ever." As they parted ways, the mayor headed straight for City Hall, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. She had no time to waste. Inside, she made her way to her office, locking the door behind her. The city lights glimmered through the large windows, casting shadows across her desk as she plugged the flash drive into her computer. Her fingers steady but her mind racing. The screen flickered to life, and one by one, images and recordings filled the screen. Each one was a stark reminder of the brutality she had just witnessed firsthand. Footage of officers pulling over innocent people, demanding compliance, their voices cold and unfeeling. Photos of men and women, faces bruised and defeated, who had dared to stand up or question the authority of these rogue officers. The mayor's stomach twisted as she watched. Each image a fresh wound, each recording a reminder of the duty she bore. She scrolled through the files, her face growing graver with each one, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about one incident. This was systemic corruption. A hidden disease eating away at the trust between her city's protectors and the people they were supposed to serve. But just as she reached the last file, her computer screen suddenly went black. Her breath caught, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Before she could react, her office phone rang, the sound loud and jarring in the quiet room. She picked it up, her voice tense. "This is the mayor." A familiar voice crackled on the other end. Low and taunting. "You've seen too much." "Madam Mayor," it said, a chilling calmness in its tone. "You should have stayed out of this." The mayor's grip tightened on the phone, her voice sharp. "Who is this?" A dark chuckle echoed through the line. "Just someone who knows how things really work in the city. Walk away now. And you might just keep that nice office of yours. Otherwise, well, accidents happen all the time. Don't they?" The line went dead, and the mayor sat in silence, the weight of the threat sinking in. But instead of fear, a surge of defiance filled her. Whoever was behind this corruption had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated her resolve. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed the number of her most trusted advisor. "It's time to call an emergency press conference," she said, her voice firm. "The people deserve to know the truth." As she hung up, she looked out over the city skyline, her heart racing with both dread and exhilaration. She knew the risks. Knew that by going public she would be stepping into the crosshairs of some very powerful enemies. But she also knew she had no choice. This was her city, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. Tonight, the mayor had drawn her line in the sand. And come morning, the battle for justice would begin. The city lay in quiet anticipation as the mayor moved through the shadowed streets towards City Hall, the flash drive burning in her pocket like a beacon of hope and danger. Her mind churned with questions and strategy, every step echoing her determination to see this through. She was aware that every move from this moment on could make her a target. But that awareness only hardened her resolve. When she finally reached her office, she locked the door behind her and crossed to her desk with purpose. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the flash drive into her computer, the weight of the information it held settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew that in these files lay the proof she needed to expose the corruption infecting her city's police force. But she also knew it could provoke retaliation that would put not only her career but her life at risk. As the screen flickered to life, her pulse quickened. Images and videos filled the screen, grainy footage of citizens being stopped and harassed by officers, their faces drawn and fearful. One video clip showed an officer shoving a man against his car, his expression cold and remorseless as the man begged for an explanation. The audio was muffled, but the sound of desperate pleas and harsh commands cut through, leaving the mayor with a deep, unshakable anger. She leaned closer, watching clip after clip, her face set in grim determination. She scrolled through photos of bruised faces, citizens with expressions of helplessness and defeat. Each image spoke volumes, each one an undeniable testament to the unchecked power these officers wielded. Her heart ached for the people of her city, for the trust that had been broken, for the betrayal they'd endured. Just then, her office phone rang, a sudden and jarring sound in the stillness. Startled, she picked up the receiver, her voice low but firm. "This is the mayor." A voice she didn't recognize, cold and detached, greeted her on the other end. "Madam Mayor, I hope you're not getting any ideas from that little flash drive." Her grip tightened on the phone, a chill running down her spine. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Someone who cares about keeping the peace in the city. Unlike you. You're meddling in things you don't understand. Walk away now." and you might still have a career by morning. She felt a surge of defiance rise within her. Keeping the peace, she retorted. Her voice like steel. You mean abusing power? Terrorizing the people you're supposed to protect? If you think I'll walk away, you don't know me at all. There was a pause. Then a slow, deliberate sigh. You've been warned, Madam Mayor. Accidents happen every day. Don't make yourself one of them. The line went dead, and the mayor sat in silence, the weight of the threat pressing down on her. But instead of fear, she felt an unyielding sense of purpose ignite within her. She had suspected this fight would come at a cost. But now, she understood just how deeply the corruption ran, and she knew she could not back down. Too much was at stake. Without hesitation, she picked up her cell phone and dialed the number of her closest advisor, a trusted ally who had stood by her side through countless challenges. The phone rang once, then twice, before a familiar voice answered. Mayor. It's late. What's going on? We have a situation, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. I need you to organize an emergency press conference. First thing in the morning. There was a pause on the other end. Then a careful response. Are you sure about this? Going public could stir things up. And not in our favor. The mayor took a deep breath, her resolve unshaken. If I don't, they'll keep getting away with this. The people of this city deserve to know the truth, no matter the consequences. Her advisor sighed, understanding the gravity of her decision. All right. I'll handle the arrangements. Just be careful. All right? You're walking into dangerous territory. I know, she replied softly. But I can't look the other way. Not anymore. As she hung up, she gazed out the large windows of her office. Her city sprawled out before her, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and neon signs. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. But in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was here to protect her city, no matter the risks. Morning came quickly. The mayor barely slept, her mind running through her speech, her strategy, preparing herself for the battle ahead. By the time dawn broke, she was dressed and ready, her face set with a calm determination as she made her way to the press conference. News crews and journalists had gathered, murmurs filling the room as they speculated about the urgency of the announcement. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and the buzz of the crowd intensified as she approached the podium. She looked out at the gathered reporters, their eager faces watching her intently, waiting for answers. Taking a deep breath, she began. Good morning. I called this press conference because the people of this city deserve transparency. They deserve to know the truth about what is happening within our own police force. A hush fell over the crowd, and the cameras zoomed in as she continued. Last night, I witnessed an incident that made it clear we have a serious problem: officers who believe they are above the law, who think they can use their power to intimidate, to control, to abuse. This is not justice. This is not what our city stands for. She paused, letting her words sink in. She could see the shock on the faces of the reporters, their pens scribbling furiously as they absorbed her revelations. I have evidence of misconduct, of abuse, of corruption that runs deep within our system. And I will not stop until every one of these individuals is held accountable. The people of this city deserve a police force they can trust, a force that protects and serves, not one that rules through fear. The room erupted into a frenzy of questions, reporters shouting over each other in their eagerness to uncover more details. She held up a hand, silencing them, her gaze unwavering. I understand that these are serious accusations. And I assure you, an investigation is already underway. I am committed to bringing justice to every victim who has been wronged by those who swore to protect them. As she stepped away from the podium, she felt a surge of strength, knowing that she had taken the first step in a long, difficult journey. The fight had only just begun. But she was ready. She had lit the spark. And there was no turning back now. Later that day, as she returned to her office, she found a sealed envelope on her desk. Her name scrawled hastily on the front. Inside was a note. Typed in all caps, "You should have walked away. Now you've started a war you can't win." She read the note, her jaw tightening. A cold chill passed over her. But it didn't diminish her resolve. If anything, it only fueled her determination. She would not be silenced. Not by threats. Not by fear. With steady hands, she slipped the note into her desk drawer, locking it away as a reminder of what she was up against. She was ready for this fight. Ready to see it through to the end. Her city was counting on her. And she would not let them down. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in the soft glow of evening light, the mayor prepared herself for the battle that lay ahead. She had taken a stand. And now, she would see it through, no matter the cost. As the mayor sat alone in her office after the press conference, a deep silence filled the room. The note, ominous and direct, lay before her on the desk. Each word a reminder of the threat she had just unleashed upon herself. "You should have walked away. Now you've started a war you can't win." She read it once more, letting the weight of the words settle before folding it carefully and placing it in her desk drawer. The press conference had sent shockwaves through the city. News stations buzzed with headlines. Reporters replaying her statements. Calling experts. Analyzing every word. Citizens were rallying. Protesting outside City Hall. Demanding justice for those who had suffered in silence. The city had awakened to the truth. And though it was painful, the mayor knew it was a necessary step toward healing. But she also knew that her actions had set a powerful, hidden enemy into motion. As she sat at her desk, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. It was her advisor. Taking a steadying breath, she picked up. "Hello, Mayor. You need to know something," came the urgent voice on the other end. After the press conference, a few key allies from the police department reached out. They said they're willing to support the investigation. But they're afraid. They've received threats, phone calls, anonymous notes. Just like the one you got. The mayor's grip tightened on the phone. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone who dared to seek justice alongside her. "Did they give any specifics? Anything we can use?" "No," her advisor replied. His voice strained. "But they mentioned a name, a senior officer who seems to be at the center of it all. Captain Reed. They believe he's the one coordinating these threats. Pulling the strings. He's protected by powerful connections in the force. Maybe even higher up in the city's political structure." The mayor took a slow breath, her mind racing as she absorbed this information. She had known of Captain Reed, a seasoned officer with a long career and a reputation that commanded respect, if not fear. She had once believed him to be loyal to the city. But it was becoming clear that his loyalty was to something far darker. "Captain Reed," she repeated softly, her gaze hardening. "Then we'll start with him. If he's involved, he's not invincible. But we need proof, something we can use to break through his defenses and expose the rot at the top." Her advisor hesitated. Then added, "There might be a way. Officer Jackson, the young officer who gave you the flash drive, he mentioned there was more information he couldn't access. Evidence stored in encrypted files on police department servers. protected by high-level clearance. If we can get access, we might find everything we need to bring Captain Reed down. The mayor's heart quickened. This was it, the break they needed. But accessing those files would be dangerous, requiring someone willing to go undercover, to infiltrate the department's secure systems without drawing attention. It was a mission that could expose anyone involved to immediate danger. "I'll speak to Jackson," she said after a moment, her voice filled with determination. "If he's willing, we'll help him get what we need." After ending the call, the mayor leaned back, her mind racing with possibilities, risks, and strategies. She knew this was a gamble, that if they were caught, the repercussions would be severe. But she also knew that to cleanse the city of its corruption, she couldn't back down. The next day, she met with Officer Jackson in a discreet location outside the city center. He arrived, his face pale but resolute, a mixture of fear and determination in his eyes. He knew that his decision to assist her placed him in direct opposition to his own colleagues. And yet, he had chosen to stand with her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I won't lie to you, Officer Jackson. What we're asking is dangerous. Captain Reed has his allies, and they won't hesitate to protect him by any means necessary." Jackson swallowed, his face tense. But he nodded. "I've seen enough, Madam Mayor. I can't stand by and let this happen anymore. If I can help, then I'll do it." The mayor placed a hand on his shoulder, a spark of pride in her eyes. "You're doing the right thing. Now, here's what we need. There are encrypted files on the department's main servers, files that could expose everything. If we can access them, we'll have enough evidence to bring Captain Reed and his entire operation to light." Jackson's face paled, but his resolve didn't waver. "I can do it," he said quietly. "But I'll need a way in. The security is tight. If they even suspect I'm trying to access those files, they'll know." The mayor nodded, already thinking through a plan. "Leave that part to me. I'll create a distraction, a public investigation that puts enough pressure on Reed to keep him and his team occupied. That should buy you the time you need." Jackson's eyes flickered with both hope and apprehension. "Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few days, the mayor launched a full-scale public investigation into the corruption within the city's police force. She called on external agencies to conduct audits, hired independent investigators, and placed direct oversight over police operations. It was a bold, calculated move that sent shockwaves through the department, forcing Reed and his allies to focus their attention on protecting their reputations rather than watching over their servers. Meanwhile, under the cover of night, Jackson entered the department's headquarters, his nerves on edge as he made his way through the corridors. He knew every corner was monitored, every move recorded. If he faltered, if he hesitated for even a moment, the cameras would catch him, and he would be exposed. He reached the server room, his hands sweating as he carefully bypassed the security protocols. As he navigated through the files, he felt the weight of each second, the knowledge that discovery would mean immediate dismissal. Or worse. His heart pounded as he accessed the encrypted files, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard, unlocking layers of security. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the files opened before him. Inside were detailed records, names, dates, transactions, logs of illegal actions sanctioned by Captain Reed and his cohorts. The scope of the corruption was staggering. He downloaded everything onto a secure drive, his heart racing as he realized the magnitude of the evidence he now held. As he exited the building, Jackson's mind was filled with both relief and fear. He had succeeded. But he knew he was a marked man now. Every step he took felt like a risk. Every sound a potential threat. But he kept going. His mission clear: get the evidence to the mayor. Later that night, Jackson met the mayor in a secure location. The drive containing the damning evidence clenched in his hand. "It's all here," he whispered, passing it to her. "Everything you need to take him down." The mayor took the drive, her face filled with gratitude and respect. "You did well, Jackson. Thanks to you, we have a real chance to end this." But just as she turned to leave, the silence was shattered by the sudden roar of an engine. A black SUV barreled down the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness, heading straight for them. Instinctively, the mayor pushed Jackson out of the way, throwing herself to the ground as the vehicle skidded to a stop. Doors swinging open, several men emerged, faces hidden under dark masks. Their intent clear. They had been found. And now, there was no turning back. The mayor rose, her eyes blazing with defiance. She knew this was a trap. A last-ditch effort by Reed's men to silence her before she could expose the truth. But she was ready to face them, to stand her ground. She was no longer just the mayor of the city, she was its protector. And she would not let fear dictate her actions. With a calm, unyielding voice, she looked at the men before her and spoke. "You think you can scare me? You think you can silence the truth? You're wrong." The men exchanged uneasy glances, her defiance shaking their confidence. They hadn't expected her to stand firm, to meet their threats with resolve. But as the sound of distant sirens pierced the night, the men retreated, the SUV roaring back down the alley and disappearing into the darkness. As the mayor and Jackson watched them vanish, she took a deep breath, clutching the drive tightly in her hand. The battle wasn't over, but she knew that victory was within reach. With Jackson by her side, they would expose the corruption that had plagued her city for too long. They would bring justice to every victim, every citizen who had suffered in silence. This was only the beginning of the fight. But the mayor knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was ready. The sun rose over the city, casting a warm light across the skyline, as if promising a new beginning. In her office, the mayor sat with Officer Jackson, the secure drive containing the damning evidence placed firmly between them. After their harrowing encounter the night before, neither had slept, both fueled by adrenaline and a shared resolve to see justice through. They both knew the next steps were crucial. If they were going to bring Captain Reed and his allies to justice, they would need to tread carefully, yet boldly. Every decision they made from this moment on would determine not only their own safety but the fate of the city. The mayor looked at Jackson, a steely determination in her eyes. "This is it, Jackson. We have the evidence, and we're going to use it. But we need to ensure this reaches the right people. People Reed can't touch." Jackson nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I'll testify, Madam Mayor. I'll stand by you, no matter the cost." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've already done more than enough. But if we want to bring down the entire operation, we need more than just the evidence and a testimony. We need a public, undeniable moment. Something that will stop Reed from silencing us before we can bring him to justice." The mayor leaned back in her chair, contemplating the gravity of their plan. She knew they needed the city's support, the unwavering backing of the people who would no longer stand for corruption. Only then could they expose Captain Reed's network without fear of retaliation. "Then we'll go public," she said after a moment, her voice carrying a new resolve. "But not through another press conference or press release. This time, we're taking it to the people directly. If Reed wants to stop us, he'll have to do it with the whole city watching. Over the next few days, the mayor orchestrated a carefully planned event, a public assembly in the city's central square. A place where every citizen, reporter, and city official could gather. She framed it as a town hall for transparency, an opportunity for the people to hear the truth about the forces at work in their city. The day of the assembly arrived quickly, the square buzzing with anticipation. Thousands of people gathered. A mix of curious onlookers, concerned citizens, and members of the press. Some held signs demanding justice. Others whispered in worry, sensing the gravity of what was about to be revealed. At the heart of the square, a makeshift stage had been set up. The mayor climbed the steps, her gaze steady as she took in the crowd. Jackson stood at her side, his posture straight, his face pale but determined. As the cameras focused on them, she felt a surge of pride. This was her city, her people, and today she would give them the truth they deserved. The mayor took a breath and leaned into the microphone. Thank you all for being here. I know you've been waiting for answers. And today, I promise to give them to you. Over the past months, our city has faced a darkness that many of you didn't even know existed, a darkness born of corruption and abuse within the very organization meant to protect us. Her words echoed across the square, a ripple of shock and anger spreading through the crowd. She could see people exchanging worried glances, some murmuring in disbelief. I have evidence, she continued, her voice unwavering, that members of our own police force have used their positions to intimidate, harm, and silence our citizens. But thanks to the bravery of certain individuals, we now have the proof needed to hold these people accountable. She paused, gesturing to Jackson, who stepped forward, holding the secure drive in his hand. The crowd watched him, many recognizing the courage it took to stand up in this moment. With a steady hand, he raised the drive for all to see. This drive contains undeniable evidence of the corruption we've uncovered, she said, her voice rising. Transactions, reports, and testimonies, all of it pointing to a network led by Captain Reed and those who have chosen to serve their own interests over the interests of the people. The crowd erupted, some in anger, others in shock. Cameras flashed, and reporters scribbled furiously, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The mayor knew this was the turning point. If Reed wanted to stop her, he would have to do so in front of the entire city. Just as she expected, a group of officers in uniform began to push through the crowd, led by none other than Captain Reed himself. His face was a mask of anger. His eyes locked onto the mayor as he approached the stage, his voice booming. "This is a farce," he shouted, gesturing to the crowd. "You're making baseless accusations, tarnishing the reputation of good officers who serve this city. You have no right." The mayor didn't flinch, meeting his glare with unyielding resolve. "I have every right," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "As the mayor of this city, I am bound to protect its people, even if that means standing against those who misuse their power. This is your chance, Captain Reed. If you have anything to say in your defense, say it here and now." Reed's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, he seemed poised to retaliate. But as he looked around, seeing the eyes of thousands of citizens watching, recording, waiting for his response, he faltered. His allies, who had followed him into the crowd, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tide turning against them. The mayor turned to Jackson, giving him a nod. With a deep breath, Jackson stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady despite the tension. "I've served with Captain Reed, and I've seen the things he's done. I've watched him use fear, manipulation, and threats to keep people in line. I've seen him break the very laws he's sworn to uphold. And today, I'm here to say, no more. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound swelling with the pent-up frustration and anger of a city that had been kept in the dark for too long. Reed's face paled, his authority crumbling as he took in the sea of faces turned against him. In that moment, he knew he had lost. There was no going back. No covering up his actions, not with the entire city bearing witness. As the noise grew louder, uniformed officers, those who had remained true to their duty, moved forward, placing Captain Reed and his allies under arrest. The crowd watched, a mix of satisfaction and relief washing over them, knowing that justice was finally being served. The mayor stepped back, allowing herself a moment to breathe, to take in the enormity of what they had accomplished. The people of the city had shown their strength, their resolve, and together, they had taken a stand against the forces that sought to undermine their trust. As Reed was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed in defeat, the mayor turned back to the crowd, a calm pride in her eyes. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for our city," she said, her voice ringing with hope. "An era where we hold those in power accountable, where we protect each other, and where we never, ever turn a blind eye to injustice." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers filling the air, as the city's citizens embraced the victory they had fought so hard to achieve. And as the mayor looked out over the people she had sworn to protect, she felt an unbreakable bond with them, a promise that no matter the challenges that lay ahead, she would always stand by their side. The city was forever changed that day, the shadows of corruption dispelled by the bright light of truth and justice. And as the mayor stepped down from the stage, she knew that this victory was not hers alone but belonged to every person who had the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to demand a city they could trust. In that moment, she understood the true meaning of leadership, not just in wielding power, but in empowering others to fight for what is right, to protect each other, and to build a future they could all believe in. The city square thrummed with energy as the cheers of the crowd echoed off the surrounding buildings, creating a vibrant resonance that could be felt in every corner of the gathering. The people of the city, who had lived for so long under the shadow of mistrust, were finally witnessing justice unfold before them. And the moment was electric. The mayor stood at the center of it all, a beacon of hope, her heart swelling with both relief and determination. As Captain Reed was led away, his expression a mix of fury and shame, the mayor watched, knowing that this was only the beginning. Rooting out the corruption that had poisoned her city's police force was a victory. But there were still questions to answer and healing to be done. She looked at Jackson, who stood beside her on the stage, his expression resolute but exhausted. He had risked everything to bring the truth to light, and the crowd's cheers were just as much for him as they were for her. She placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a nod of gratitude. "You did this, Jackson," she said softly. "Your courage has inspired an entire city." Jackson nodded, a look of quiet pride mixed with relief in his eyes. "Thank you, Madam Mayor. I never thought I'd see this day." The mayor turned back to the crowd, raising a hand to quiet them as she prepared to address them once more. The cheers softened to a murmur, and an attentive silence settled over the square as the people waited for her words. "Today is a victory," she began, her voice strong and clear, carrying across the sea of faces. "But it's more than that, it's a turning point. We have uncovered corruption. Yes. But we must now ensure that it never takes root here again. We must rebuild the trust that was broken, both in our institutions and in each other." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The crowd stood silent, their expressions a mix of hope and resolve. She could see the pain in their faces, the betrayal they felt, but also the determination to create a city they could believe in once more. "I know many of you are angry. And you have every right to be," she continued. "We put our trust in people who were supposed to protect us, only to find that they were using their power to intimidate and control. But together, we have shown that this city is stronger than any one person or group. We have shown that when we come together, when we stand united, we can create real change." The crowd erupted into applause again, a collective acknowledgement of the strength they had found in one another. The mayor took a breath, allowing herself a brief smile before continuing. "To move forward," she said, her tone softening, "we need not only accountability but also reform. Effective immediately. I will be implementing a complete overhaul of our police department's oversight and accountability measures. This will include citizen advisory boards, independent audits, and a public reporting system for any misconduct. No longer will power be held in the shadows. From this day on, the people of this city will be the ones in control." Cheers erupted once more, and the mayor could feel the energy in the crowd lifting, a renewed sense of hope and purpose settling over them. But she wasn't finished yet. She looked over at a group of families standing toward the front, their faces etched with a pain deeper than most. She recognized them as the relatives of those who had suffered at the hands of Reed and his allies. People who had been harassed, intimidated, and unfairly targeted. She knew their pain, and she wanted them to know that they were not forgotten. She stepped down from the stage, moving toward them with quiet dignity. The crowd parted to let her pass, watching as she approached the families, her expression filled with compassion. She met the eyes of a woman standing at the front of the group. A woman who had lost her son in a confrontation with corrupt officers, a young man who had been unfairly profiled and targeted simply because of his background. The mayor took the woman's hands in her own, looking into her eyes with a sincerity that spoke volumes. "I know this victory does not bring back what you've lost," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "But I promise you, your son's story will not be forgotten. His life and his memory will be a part of the changes we're making here today. This city will remember him, and we will honor him by ensuring that no other family has to endure what yours has." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Mayor. I want to know that his life meant something, that his story wasn't for nothing." The mayor squeezed her hands, her own eyes bright with emotion. His life meant everything. And because of him, this city is changing. We will make sure his story lives on, not as a statistic, but as a reminder of what we stand for. She turned to the crowd once more, addressing them from where she stood among the families. "To all of you who have suffered at the hands of injustice, know that your stories are heard, and they matter. This victory is not just for our city, it's for every person who has ever been silenced, every voice that has been ignored. We are building a city that values every citizen, every life. And we will not stop until that vision becomes a reality." The applause that followed was thunderous, and the mayor felt a wave of emotion surge through her as the people stood together, unified by a shared commitment to rebuild their community. She returned to the stage, Jackson by her side, both of them standing as symbols of resilience and the power of truth. In the days that followed, the city set to work on the reforms the mayor had promised. Citizen advisory boards were formed, made up of people from all walks of life, representing every neighborhood and background. They worked closely with law enforcement, creating transparency and fostering trust between the police and the communities they served. Officer Jackson became a key figure in the reform process, working as a liaison between the police department and the citizens' advisory boards. His bravery had inspired others within the force to step forward, to acknowledge the mistakes of the past and commit to a better future. Together, they forged a new chapter for the city's police force. One built on respect, accountability, and trust. As the months went by, the city began to heal. Streets once filled with tension and distrust became places of connection, where people knew they could rely on one another. The people of the city took ownership of their community, participating in neighborhood programs, community meetings, and initiatives aimed at building bridges between law enforcement and residents. The mayor continued to lead with the same unyielding resolve that had carried her through the battle against corruption. She visited schools, community centers, and neighborhoods, speaking with citizens, listening to their concerns, and ensuring that they remained a central part of the city's future. One evening, as the mayor walked through the city square, now a symbol of hope and resilience, she was approached by a young girl, no older than 12. The girl looked up at her with wide, admiring eyes. "Are you the mayor?" the girl asked, a shy smile on her face. The mayor smiled warmly and nodded. "Yes, I am. And what's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied, a spark of pride in her voice. "I want to be a mayor like you someday. My mom says you helped our city be safe again." The mayor's heart swelled, and she knelt to the girl's level, her expression filled with warmth. "You know, Lily, one day you'll make an amazing mayor. Because being a good leader isn't about power, it's about caring for others. Just like you do. Promise me you'll remember that." Lily nodded, her face lighting up. "I promise." As the girl ran back to her mother, the mayor watched her go, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over her. She knew that while her work was far from over, the city had been transformed. And as long as people like Lily believed in a brighter future, she knew that the changes they had fought for would endure. The city was no longer just a place of buildings and streets, it was a community bound by resilience, by a commitment to justice, and by a shared vision of hope. The mayor knew that challenges would continue to come, but she was ready to face them, alongside the people who had stood with her. Together, they had changed the city's story, rewriting it as one of courage, unity, and a fierce determination to stand up for what was right. And as she looked out over her city, now bathed in the soft glow of evening lights, she knew that they were all part of something greater, a legacy that would carry forward for generations to come. As the sun set on the city that evening, casting a warm glow over buildings and streets alike, the mayor found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The months following the revelation of Captain Reed's corruption had been a whirlwind of reform, healing, and rebuilding. The citizens had been transformed from a disheartened public into an engaged, hopeful community. The mayor, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by the resilience she saw in her people every day. She stood in her office, looking out over the city square that had been the stage for the public reckoning. Now, where cries for justice had once echoed, the square was filled with families gathering for the evening, street musicians playing soft tunes, and children laughing as they chased each other around the fountains. This was the city she had always dreamed of, a place where people could feel safe, where justice was not just an ideal but a lived reality. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from Officer Jackson. "Meeting in the square at 7. Got something to show you." She smiled, curious about what he had planned. Jackson had become not only her ally but a friend, someone who shared her vision for the city and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. As the clock struck 7, she made her way down to the square, greeted by familiar faces as she walked. Citizens waved, thanked her, and shared updates on their lives, making her realize just how much closer her work had brought her to the community. She spotted Jackson standing near a small, newly erected statue, a modest but beautiful monument that had not been there just a few days before. She walked over. Her curiosity piqued. Jackson greeted her with a warm smile. His usual reserved expression softened with pride. "Madam Mayor," he said, gesturing to the statue. "I thought you might like to see this in person." The statue was of a young man in a simple stance. His eyes raised toward the sky, with an expression of quiet resilience. At its base was a plaque that read, "In memory of those who lost their voices, so that others might find theirs." Below it, engraved in smaller letters, were the names of the citizens whose lives had been affected by the corruption they had fought so hard to dismantle, including those who had been directly harmed or lost to Reed's abuse of power. The mayor felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at the names, each one a reminder of the cost of their battle for justice. She touched the base of the statue gently, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. "It's beautiful, Jackson," she said softly. "Thank you. This is exactly what this city needs, a reminder of where we came from and what we're fighting for." Jackson nodded, his gaze lingering on the statue. "I thought it was important for people to remember that change doesn't come without sacrifice. These people, they're the reason we're standing here today. They're the ones who inspired us to keep fighting, even when it seemed impossible." The mayor took a deep breath, steadying herself as she felt the weight of those words. She knew that, despite all they had accomplished, their work was not over. The battle against corruption and injustice was an ongoing one. But now, they had a foundation to build upon, a community ready to stand together against any threat to their hard-won peace. "Thank you for reminding us," she said, meeting Jackson's gaze. "This monument isn't just for the past, it's a promise to the future. That will protect what we've built here." As they stood in silence, watching the crowd gather around the statue, a voice called out from behind them. It was an elderly man, his face lined with years of life in the city. He walked slowly but with purpose, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Mayor, Officer Jackson," he began, his voice steady. "I just wanted to thank you both. I've lived in this city my whole life, and I've seen it change in ways I never thought possible. But what you've done here, giving people hope again, it means everything." The mayor smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, sir. We couldn't have done it without the strength of people like you." The man nodded, reaching out to shake Jackson's hand before continuing. "You know, I remember a time when folks wouldn't even dare to speak up. We all thought things would never change. But you proved us wrong. You showed us that we can make a difference if we stand together." A few others joined them, sharing similar sentiments, thanking them for the courage to lead the city through its darkest hour. The mayor felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, knowing that this support had been hard-earned and that the trust they had rebuilt was more valuable than anything else. As the crowd grew, the mayor took a step back, giving Jackson a knowing nod before she turned to address the people who had gathered around the statue. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the square. "This monument stands not only as a memory of those we've lost but as a reminder of the power we have as a community." She paused, looking over the crowd, seeing faces of all ages, races, and backgrounds. "Our journey hasn't been easy, and we still have a long way to go. But I know that as long as we stand together, we can face any challenge, overcome any obstacle. We are stronger now because we've learned to trust one another, to lean on one another, and to speak up for what is right." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, a warm, unified gesture that seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. She continued, her voice filled with conviction. "Let this monument remind us of our promise to each other. That no matter what comes our way, we will stand up against injustice, protect the vulnerable, and build a future we can all be proud of. As she finished speaking, the applause grew louder, the crowd's cheers filling the night air. She felt a deep sense of peace wash over her, knowing that the city was ready to move forward, stronger and more united than ever. Later, as the crowd dispersed, the mayor and Jackson lingered by the statue, both of them lost in thought. Jackson finally broke the silence, his voice filled with hope. "You know, Madam Mayor, I think this city is going to be all right." She smiled, looking out over the square with a sense of calm determination. "I think you're right, Jackson. And I think we're just getting started." As they walked away, side by side, the city's lights illuminating their path, they left behind a legacy, one that would remind future generations of the strength that came from unity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The journey they had begun together had changed them, shaped them, and forged an unbreakable bond between them and the city they loved. And though the road ahead would surely hold challenges, they knew that as long as they continued to stand up for what was right, they would always have the city's support behind them. Together, they had created a community that would carry forward their legacy, building on the foundation of justice and integrity they had fought so hard to establish. As they walked into the night, leaving the statue behind, the city around them seemed to glow with the promise of a new dawn, one filled with hope, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a people united for a brighter tomorrow.